podcast. I don't know what just happened with the whole thing. I was trying to get something on the screen and it just fell off the wayside. But here we go. So we're recording the podcast. Obviously, if you were joining before the stream got abruptly ended, which I don't know why it was ended in the first place. It's beside the point. It's kind of like the Lions injury situation right now because you go into yesterday's game. You're like, okay, we're playing the Buffalo Bills. This could be a potential Super Bowl matchup. And you're thinking there's nothing really that can go wrong. Like if you lose this game, you're 15-2. You're a two-loss team right now, right? And you have the potential to go 15-2 and still win the number one seed, still win the division. Everything's in front of you because you didn't lose the NFC team. What happened in yesterday's game is concerning, but part of me wants to say I don't think we are. My expectations of a Super Bowl, in my opinion, are dead. That's my expectations. I'm still hopeful that they can make a Super Bowl. I'm still hopeful that they're going to be a good team moving forward. But with the amount of injuries they have, and like I looked at Ali McNeil as a major linchpin to that front defensive line. When Hutch went out, I said, "Look, we got Ali McNeil. He could rush the passer. Those are your two best pass rushers, Ali McNeil and Aiden Hutchinson. Before Aiden Hutchinson got hurt, I said if we could just weather the storm, try to put together some not hopefully no more injuries. That's what I said it would after the Hutch injury, and then you go on and you just every week it's someone new. It's Anzalone, it's Derek Barnes, it's Malcolm Rodriguez, it's this guy, it's this guy. Like before Thanksgiving, like you were literally going through like bounds of people, and then we went to the last week, and you have just a whole Trevor Trove of people like Ezekiel Turner. As no one knew who he was before he made that tackle on Jordan Love, and it's just like Aaron Glenn is doing more with less than he's ever done in his entire career. He's never done more with less. Like, put it this way: imagine if Ben Johnson lost Sewell, Frank, let's say Zeitler and Decker and Gibbs and Montgomery. That's a hell of a loss. Like you're really down to studs at that point. And the NFL is an unforgiving league in terms of the way injuries happen, and you have to move forward and try to pick yourself up and do some things like that. But when you talk about the Lions and their potential of going forward, there's no doubt that the schedule they have ahead of them isn't daunting. I mean, Chicago seems like they're going to give up. They're giving up anyways. But we'll see what they do against the Minnesota Vikings. I could really hope that the Minnesota Vikings or the Bears come out to play the Minnesota Vikings for a last hoorah. But I'm not counting on it. And then you got San Francisco, which they're another team that's been desperately injured, but you're still a two-loss team. You're 11-2. You're still a two-loss team. They're potentially out of their division race, which is it's a division that's still getting fought for, and either both teams still have 6 losses, so they're in a situation, but they're not battling like Detroit. Detroit has 2 losses to this point. Yesterday was their second loss, and it felt like last night watching the game, hearing what happened with Ali McNeil and Carlton Davis, and then today with Dave Montgomery being sidelined with an MCL injury, Ali McNeil with a torn ACL, Carlton Davis with a broken jaw. It's just one thing after another for this team, and it's like, man, what are the reality of the situation is like, I think a lot of people, myself included, are looking at this like, okay, the expectations I had of winning a Super Bowl might be gone. I hope that they can win a Super Bowl. I'm confident that Aaron Glenn, Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson, will have these guys ready to go, and that's no doubt about it. But here's what I worry about with these injuries, in particular. With Carlton Davis, I mean, we heard good news today about potentially getting a guy like Ifeatu Melifonwu back, and potential Ennis Rakestraw. The issue there with getting with getting Rakestraw back and getting Malafangwa back, that would help a lot. That would help a lot, but you still have no pass rush up front. Lee McNeil was your highest productive pass rusher on your team. Him and Hutch out, your two top of your pressures on your team are gone. They're gone. And now you're gonna have to rely on a guy like, Levi Onwuzurike and Pat O'Connor, which Pat O'Connor's doing a damn good job, but to expect more from what we've got from these guys is a tough task, man. And especially when you look forward to potential playing teams like, I think the only team in the NFC that I completely do think that could really give us a run for our money is the Eagles. But if you look at the Rams, the way they're playing, Kyren Williams, and the way that the linebacker position has been struggling with Alex Anzalone out, and obviously things could change if you get Anzalone back. Obviously things can change if you get Derek Barnes back. But right now, it's another storm that they had to be weathered, and it's just one storm after another. It's like, I feel like the Lions are they're the house in a city that has been hit by multiple tornadoes, but their house hasn't got touched yet. Like, their house, they keep avoiding disaster, avoiding disaster, avoiding disaster. And finally, the tornado hits it, and this is the NFL. And the thing I worry about with the Montgomery injury is now Gibbs has to take the brunt load of the carries. I mean, I'm sure Vaki and Reynolds will play their way on the field, but Gibbs and Montgomery, they work in unison. It's such a great pair. Like, Montgomery is the bruiser, he's a physical guy. Gibbs is the very elusive, fast. And my hope is that he stays the same throughout, like maybe 16, 17 carries. But someone's gonna have to come in here and relieve him, and they need a running back that can come in here and do the job. And the issue with that is, I feel like, so the last couple games, if I don't know if you're aware, but the Lions have only averaged like 3.5 yards per rush the last 2.5 games. So since the second half of the Chicago Bears game, they've only averaged 2.5 yards rushing. And it leads me to believe either Graham Glasgow's hurt. We know that Frank Ragnow is playing with the torn pec. We know that these guys are severely battered, bruised, and beaten on the offensive line, and they're playing through injuries, and you could tell that they're playing through injuries. And today, Graham Glasgow went through an X-ray check, and something's up when you go through an X-ray check. So they're struggling. Jahmyr Gibbs hasn't had the bounce like he has because the offensive line isn't getting penetration. And it feels like the offense is going to have to win these games going forward because, you saw what happened yesterday. The Lions offense, struggled for 2 series in the first half and 2 series in the second half. And by the time we got, those 2 series were huge. Like, if you score one of those, it could be a different game. But we're asking the Lions offense to be perfect. That's what we're asking for them. And that's a tall task for any offense, especially once you get in the playoffs. But I know what this Lions offense is capable of. I know what they're capable of. And I know that they could score 40 a game, But when you get to the NFL playoffs and you get to NFC and you're playing teams like, I don't think the NFC is any great shakes in terms of the way that they're playing. I don't think do I think the NFC South champion is going to be any good? Well, the Buccaneers are actually playing pretty good. So if they win the NFC South, that could be tough. The Rams are playing pretty tough. And you look around and, the Eagles are obviously a tough team. Then you look at the wild cards like the Vikings and the Packers, and those are tough teams. And it's just one thing after another. And I can no longer say that the Detroit Lions are a Super Bowl team. That's what I expect. When I say Super Bowl team, I expected them to go to the Super Bowl. That was my expectation. I know people say don't expect things, but that was my expectation that they would go to the Super Bowl or at least make it to the NFC Championship game. And I can't say that now. The whole dynamic has shifted because you lost your best cornerback, and we talked about this on a prior show that Carlton Davis was playing since week 9 as a top-rated cornerback overall defensive grade of 83.1. Minimum 100 snaps. His coverage grade of 88.4 is also number 1. He has allowed a passer rating of 56.3 over this stretch, better than all but 11 cornerbacks. And I look at that and I just say, you lose Lee McNeil when you're top pass rushers. You lose Carlton Davis. And I just feel bad for Aaron Glenn because this guy has had absolutely nothing to work with in terms of, Hutch goes down, Barnes goes down, Davenport went down early, Anzalone went down, Malcolm Rodriguez went down, and he's relying on a Trevor Trove of Ezekiel Turner, Trevor Nowatzki, who didn't play yesterday, and Jack Campbell. And as good as Jack Campbell is, because he is really good, he's the ninth best linebacker in football per Pro Football Focus. He's even struggled. He's been the only one holding this thing together in the linebacker core. Thankfully, you do have Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch, and if Ifeatu Melifonwu can come back, that would be ideal. But right now, the way we see it, it's tough, man. It's a tough. Losing was one thing. Losing all 3 of these guys that we just talked about is another. And you look at the IR list. Like, look at this IR list. You could literally put an NFL team out on the IR list alone. Anzalone, Rakestraw, Melifonwu. You got obviously Hutchinson. You got Nate Lynn, Mekhi Wingo, who's a pretty good backup. John Kaminsky. We forget about John Kaminsky. It's one thing after another. And this doesn't even include Elaine McNeil, Carlton Davis. And now it's gonna be Dave Montgomery. And Dave Montgomery is out for the year, and it sucks because this Lions team is so good. This Lions team, when healthy, is one of the best teams in the NFL. And it feels like today that this team is losing more and more talent by the week, and that's not the way it's supposed to go. I'm watching ESPN, and they're saying, "Damn, this is stupid." Like, I'm hearing Adam Schefter say, "I have never heard anything like this." I'm like, what do you mean? I'm gonna actually put this up there, but let me put it up here for a minute. But yeah, like Adam Schefter saying, "Oh, I've never seen anything like this." I'm like, you're the lead NFL insider, and you've never seen anything like that. That's insane. It just goes to show you. But here's the thing. Dan Campbell said this today at the press conference. Sometimes you got to get punched in the face before you know how to respond. This is what he said last week on the Moving the Chains on SiriusXM Radio.
We're not taking excuses, and you can't, because once you let that in the door, then everything's an excuse, And
yep.
Those guys, whoever you are, we're going to give you a chance to make a play and help us do your job, but you gotta hold up your end of the bargain and go balls to the wall.
So obviously he's not going to make excuses. Obviously, a guy like Dan Campbell, he's not going to make the excuses that this team is struggling or that this team is, they're not going to be good or whatever the case may be. He's not going to do that. He would just never do that. So my whole thing about this is, look, it sucks for the Lions because I thought that, like, he's not obviously, Dan Campbell's not going to make an excuse. Aaron Glenn's not going to make an excuse. You hear Jared Goff uttering the same thing that Dan Campbell's saying, and you're going, okay, I understand what they're saying, but, deep down inside, they have to know this might be a little bit different. Like, this might be a little bit different. And, it just sucks, man. It sucks because, you hear guys like, you hear guys like, Adam Schefter, Booger McFarland talk about the Lions injuries, like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. And you're like, dude, like how much can you really take? It's just it's insane to me that we're in this situation. It's insane to me that this is such a desolate, area the schedule because you can't go get a free agent. There's not many free agents, especially in the defensive line, available. You're not going to get a pass rusher here. You could hope for like maybe like someone come. You could hope that the people like Levi and Josh they step up, but this is a incredible opportunity for them. Number one, number two, you know, E-Man is someone that they're going to count on. I can't really count on E-Man to be the guy, but if you can, then I guess that's okay. But I can't count on Emmanuel Mosley right now. Rakestraw is a rookie. He's dealing with it, and it's not a good situation. I feel like the worst one of them all that really set me off. I was already pretty pissed off about losing Carlton Davis and losing Aleem McNeil, but Montgomery was the one that I was like, okay, I've heard enough. I've literally seen enough to it's just too much. Like this is too many losses. And I'm gonna play you this video from ESPN. This is from Adam Schefter. He was talking on the Pat McAfee show. It's gonna load up, but he was on the Pat McAfee show and he says he's never seen anything like this. This is the guy who's been around the NFL for many, many years, seen many, many teams have many, many injuries, and you go over it again. Like the amount of injuries this team has is just insanity. But it is what it is. All right. It's gonna load up right now. I think it is. I don't know why it's taking so long. Technology really sucks, Sometimes it takes too long. But anyways, I just think that this Lions team is struggling in the worst ways possible. Because they're struggling to find replacements. Like if this happened earlier in the year, where maybe trade deadline, maybe a guy like Brett Holmes is going to make a deal at the trade deadline. Cool. We're 3 weeks away from the playoffs. Like we got 3 weeks left of games for the Lions. We got the Chicago Bears next week, the San Francisco 49ers. Then you play Minnesota you play Minnesota last week for rightfully everything that you could imagine. Everything you could imagine. So we'll see what happens. Let's get to some comments here on the show. LMs on YouTube says brutal day, and you know what? I totally agree with you. It totally sucks, man. It sucks. It sucks. LM says Monty is out for the year now. Is this Lions offense near the same? This is what I fear. And LM brings up a good point here. What I fear from the Detroit Lions, I believe is coming up. What I fear from the Detroit Lions is obviously Jahmyr Gibbs is going to take a lot of the brunt load. Like we know that he's going to take a lot of the load. We know that Jahmyr Gibbs has played. He's a stud. But him, what you can't discount is him and Montgomery and the synergy that they have. Sonic and Knuckles is not just a marketing term. It's literally the way they play. They literally take each other's synergy and they work off each other. One guy isn't doing good, the other guy is doing good. One guy has an off day, the other has a great day. It's just the way it is. And they have such a great change of pace. Like I feel like when in NFL, when you're playing Detroit, I feel like when you see Dave Montgomery, you're like, oh shit. But when you see Jahmyr Gibbs, you're like, oh shit. Like there's no vacation away from the Detroit Lions running the ball on you. And so when you talk about Jahmyr Gibbs having to take the brunt load of the carries now, that opens up an interesting dynamic because now, Sione Vaki is going to be put in here, or Craig Reynolds is going to be put in here. And it's just like, man, like this is not good. And especially when you think about this, I don't think the offensive line is all that. I don't think they're all that healthy. We all know that Frank Ragnow is dealing with an injury. We all know that Taylor Decker has been in and out of the lineup for a couple games, but just feels like it feels like the Lions offensive line, something is going on. They're not playing at the level they're playing at. Like I'll give you a little glimpse. Look at this. This is from yesterday. This is the Pro Football Focus grades. But if you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, Taylor Decker, Sewell did pretty good. Look at that right there. Your two worst players were in the interior of the defense, the offensive line. Obviously, they were going against Ed Oliver, which Ed Oliver just, man, he destroyed him. But 34.3 for Graham Glasgow. I've never seen a lower score than that for Glasgow. Never. Frank Ragnow, 43.9. He had 3 penalties. It just, something doesn't seem right there. And when you add in Dave Montgomery getting hurt, it kind of opens up Pandora's box of what this rushing attack can potentially be without Monty there. And that's what I fear the most. I fear that Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have to take a front load of the carries. And I don't like that. Don't like it at all. And Pat Kerwin of the Sirius XM Satellite Radio, he mentioned something about when he compares Gibbs to Alvin Kamara all the time. You know, he said when Alvin Kamara got the front load of the carries, something changed. He got hit around and all that stuff. And that's what happens in the NFL, man. You get hit around a lot. And that could potentially open up injuries for Jahmyr Gibbs. And that's not what we want to be talking about, but that is the reality of the NFL, and especially a running back position. And with our injury luck, I mean, it was a good little point out by Pat Kerwin there. But that's interesting. Let's get to another comment. Derek says, we're in serious trouble. All you could do is lean on the offense and let it rip. Aggressive plays. Reckless plays, trick plays, let it all hang out there. Are we cursed? Terrible luck? Should we reevaluate our strength and conditioning department? Are we practicing too hard? Look, I don't think practicing hard is the name of the game, because you really can't practice in pads anymore, and there really aren't full practices and all that jazz. But when you look at the way that this season has gone, this goes back to I think this is the most important thing that people can learn. Last year, Dan Campbell he was aggressive, but he wasn't as aggressive. This year, last 2 games, he's been very, very aggressive. You notice that? Green Bay game, he goes for it on his own side of his 50. I've never seen Dan Campbell do that. Even when he was going for it in the beginning years, I never seen him do that. I think he only did it once or twice, and that was because they were down by 21 points against Seattle. But I never seen that. I never seen Dan Campbell kick an onside kick with 12 minutes left. It signals to me, I don't know if it signals to you guys out there, but it signals to me that Dan Campbell even knows that his defense is running on E, and he needs possessions back. Like everyone bitches about the onside kick. They're like, why did he kick the onside kick? Whatever the case may be. Why did he do it? It's a stupid decision. Well, they couldn't stop Josh Allen. If I go back on it, Josh Allen and the Bills were 8.6 yards per play. They were not getting stopped at all. Not getting stopped at all. And you keep thinking about it, like, what is this team capable of? And you're just like, oh, every step of the way, the Lions they could not stop Josh Allen. They could not. So they were trying to get possessions back. The offense kind of stalled, and that's kind of where we're at right now. Like this is the reality of our situation right now. We are in a situation where we cannot sit here and be passive. We have to be aggressive. We have no other choice. Like, I love to say, hey, Aaron Glenn, go get a stop for us. But what is Aaron Glenn going to stop? What is he going to use? Who is he going to use? He just lost to Lee McNeil. He just lost his number 1 cornerback. He lost his defensive end that he, is a linchpin. He lost his defensive tackle, who's another linchpin. Lee McNeil is getting paid $30 million a year. He's one of the best defensive tackles in the game. Most underrated defensive tackle, in my opinion, because there's not many defensive tackles like Lee McNeil. Yeah, the way he's been playing, balling. But you lose that. Like, how many more losses can the Lions actually get? That's the thing. It's like everyone could sit here and say, "Oh, we're gonna pile through it. We're gonna go through it. We're gonna keep going. Grit, 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 grit." Grit can only take you so far, man. It gets to a point where you need talent, and we're starting to see it a little bit. But this Lions team is so talented that they're not showing it, you know, all the way. But man, like even Dan Campbell, you could see it in the way he's coaching right now. He is coaching super, super aggressive to not get to get the ball back. We've seen the offense sputter a couple times, but they still put up 40 points. It's insane. It truly is. Like the Lions are such a good team, and these defensive injuries, like if you just had 1 or 2 or 3 back, you might be going to Super Bowl regardless, because the offense is so good. But we'll see what happens with the whole Montgomery injury, but the defense is just decimated by injuries, and losing a guy like Carlton Davis and Aleem McNeil now, it just feels like how many more injuries can this Lions defense take? Like I'm enamored how good Aaron Glenn is doing right now. He is literally working. He is a mad scientist back there because he has nothing to work with. He is working with a lot of practice squad players. We've lost backups to the backup. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not anyone's fault. I don't think it's anyone's fault. A lot of these are torn ACLs and just bad luck. But I gotta tell you, man, even Adam Schefter, I'll play you this clip. This is an amazing clip. This is from ESPN about the Lions injury situation.
Corey here, Shefty.
Yeah, well, essentially, he went out of the game briefly with the knee injury. And then after the game, he came out, and obviously they found that he's got a sprained MCL, and they think he's going to be done for the season. Now, I'm not proclaiming him to be out for the year just yet because he is getting further testing. He is getting a second opinion, and we don't know what that's going to uncover. But I would say that there's a sense and belief amongst multiple people right now that David Montgomery will not play again this season. And at the very least, he's going to be out indefinitely, if not for the rest of the season. Knuckles will be sidelined. I don't know how many blows one team can withstand. And I don't remember the last time that we've seen one team this decimated with injuries. They have essentially gone through an entire defense. Aleem McNeil tore his ACL yesterday. Carlton Davis broke his jaw yesterday. They're already without Aiden Hutchinson, Marcus Davenport, Malcolm Rodriguez, Derek Barr. We go on and on here. It's hard to line up a team when you lose that many players and are signing players off practice squads and off the street. And it's really disappointing because this team was positioned to have the most memorable year in franchise history. And maybe they still can. That's up to them to try to forge ahead. But it's not going to be without their challenges right now and all the injuries that they've suffered, especially this past week, like this past weekend alone.
It's just amazing. You hear about an insider for like Adam Schefter. He's been around the game so effing long. And when he's saying he's never seen anything like this, I mean, I can't even say I remember stuff like this. You remember back in the day when the Lions would have like a trove of injuries, like Bill Bentley would be getting hurt and everything like this. This is way different, man. These are, if you go look on the injury report, the people on IR, the people that are current, injured, like Nowatzki, that was the guy we picked off of waivers from Arizona. Like people don't understand, like he's now our starter. And then you got Ezekiel Turner, and then you got El-Quadin Muhammad, and you got this guy and this guy. Like it's becoming like Rex Ryan put it perfectly. It's like, hey, can you go do this blitz? Hey, can you cover him? Like it's literally getting to the point where if I'm Aaron Glenn, how much can you take? Like how much can you really, really take? Like it's just insane. It's totally insane, and we're dealing with it, but Dan Campbell's not going to make any excuses. You heard him earlier. There is absolutely no excuses from Dan Campbell because once you let him through the door, everything is an excuse. But my God, man, like you just have one thing after another and another. It's just it's literally insane. But it is what it is, I guess. Anyways, let's move on to what we think could be more better and more situation. So, how bad was Graham Glasgow yesterday? Graham Glasgow was brutal yesterday, and this shows how bad he was. Ed Oliver generated a season high 10 pressures and 42 pass rushes, 23.8 against the Lions, the most pressures in any game by a defensive tackle this season. Amazing. Oliver had 5 of his pressures coming under 2.5. It says season, but it's supposed to be seconds, a career high, and the most quick passes by a defensive tackle pressures by a defensive tackle this year. This season, Oliver had a majority of pressures coming against the Lions left guard Graham Glasgow, 7 out of 10. Overall, Glasgow allowed 9 pressures and 62 pass blocking attempts, tied for third most pressures by an interior offensive lineman this lineman in a game this season. We heard it. Graham went for X-rays, right? He went for X-rays after the game. They came back negative. He's sore, Dan Campbell said, but man, when you hear that type of stuff, like 10 pressures and 7 out of 10 have came against you, that's a brutal take, man. That is a total brutal take. And we talk about this Detroit Lions team like all the time, and we say the offensive line is the linchpin. The offensive line is the linchpin. We know where Ragnow's hurt. I think we can assume that Glasgow was hurt too. We know that Decker has been in and out of the lineup. Like, we know that this offensive line is playing with injuries right now. Like, they don't seem like the same offensive line, especially since that Chicago second half. I mean, since the second half of that Chicago game, they've only averaged 2.5 yards per rush. That's not Detroit Lions football right there. That's not Detroit Lions football. And there's another spot where you just worry about who could potentially be injured and how bad is it affecting their play. Because, I never seen Glasgow and Ragnow at the bottom like this in a long time. I think it's very, very rare that you see Ragnow back there. Glasgow has had a pretty rough year in terms of overall production, and he's been struggling. I think it's partly due to injury, but I've never seen Ragnow and Glasgow have such a bad day. And they've went against some good defensive tackles, and they held their own for the most part. But you just have a feeling that potentially there's more injuries that could come afoot. It just sucks, man. It sucks because now we got Dave Montgomery who's hurt. It's just ridiculous. But I don't know, man. It's just you feel like there's injuries on the offensive line. They're playing through injuries. They're toughing through it. Their offensive linemen will tell you they never come out for injuries unless it's a serious injury. I mean, we have a guy as our center who is playing with a torn pec right now. Like, it's very well known that he's playing with a torn pec, Frank Ragnow, which Frank is a beast. Frank's just a total stud. And he's playing through it. He's trying to, grind it through. And it just tells you about the grit of that guy playing through a torn pec. I don't think people on the stream could go lift a dog food bag at Costco with a torn pec, let alone play a football game with a torn pec. That guy's an absolute animal. But it comes at a cost. And sometimes, if Glasgow's hurt and Ragnow is hurt, that's a very, very it's a rough matchup, man. That's a rough matchup, especially if you go into the playoffs and you go play the Rams where they got Kobe Turner, and you go play the Eagles and they got Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, or Kenny Clark for the Packers, which that was another defensive tackle they really struggle with. But Kenny Clark's like the run guy, but they struggle in the run game there. And you just look across the NFL, like in the NFC landscape, to get to the Super Bowl, there's a lot of defensive tackles that you're gonna have to go against. Like, you have to play the Bucs again. Vita Vea, Kalijah Kancey. Like, it doesn't get any easier, man. Doesn't get any easier. All right, let's get to some comments here. Derek said, Barry on the Facebook says it's time to show why Holmes drafted Vaki. And And I echo Derek and Barry's comment. Derek says he's excited to see Vaki because I think he's going to surprise us. I think he could be a really useful tool. Hopefully he could be someone like Monty. I don't expect him to be Monty. I just expect someone, a little bit. Just give me a little bit of what I could expect, right? Just give me a little bit. I don't need Dave Montgomery type numbers. I just need you to go in there, get maybe 8-9 carries a game, help Gibbs, not get totally overloaded with his carries. And that's just it is what it is. I think Vaki will be pretty good though. I do. LM says on YouTube it's a season's worst nightmare. It's the thing about I'm gonna echo off. LM's a great commenter, but he says, yeah, it's a season's worst nightmare. And it is this season has been the worst nightmare I could ever imagine. You expect to have injuries through an NFL season, but I don't think anyone can expect that they would go. Their backups would have to be in, and they would have to go to their next backups, the practice squad guys, on a whole defense. Like I've never seen this in my life. I don't remember the last time, and I looked it up. The last time a Super Bowl team went to the Super Bowl and won with more than 12 players on IR. There were two that I saw. I couldn't go back to the old days because if you go back to the old days, they didn't have to release injury information because, whatever the case may be. But I went back to two that I could really find. That's why I didn't do the podcast last night. There were two examples of teams that had a big IR list and some significant injuries that made it to Super Bowl one. One was the Green Bay Packers. Now they had 15 guys on IR, or 17 or 15. I think it was 13 or 15, whatever the case may be. No major injuries to guys like Rodgers. No major guys to guys like on the defensive end. They're defensive studs. So it was a little bit different. They had a lot of guys on IR you really didn't know. They were probably depth pieces. So, I mean, it's not really much to talk about. I mean, the Packers had a lot of people on IR, but most of them were depth pieces, unlike Detroit, where you got starter and starter and starter and starter on the IR. The one I could tie back to Detroit was the Giants. Back in I think it was 90 with Jeff Hostetler when he went in for Phil Simms. They had 14 on IR, and there was a couple of big names on that list. Not big names, but just like guys that you saw were huge contributors to that team through the season, and they won the Super Bowl with Jeff Hostetler, and that's something that you could look back at. But losing a guy like remember, you lose a guy like Hutch, you lose a guy like John Kaminsky, you lose a guy like Mekhi Wingo, Derek Barnes, Anzalone, Jalen Reeves-Maybin. Now you lose Eli McNeil and Carlton Davis. There's only so much you could take in terms of heavy duty injuries. And I talked to someone the other day, and this was the most interesting thing I've learned. Is I talked to this guy and I was like, okay, look, Lions are dealing with all these injuries. Can you equate a time that you've seen this many injuries from one team? And he looked at me and he goes, guy with 35 years in the NFL in terms of pro personnel and everything, looked at me and said, no. He goes, I've never seen the names that you see on that list, and they have only lost 2 games with 3 games left in the year. He goes, in my mind, Dan Campbell would be coach of the year. Aaron Glenn would be the assistant coordinator of the year. Because what they've done to keep that team intact in terms of the injuries that they've established, they've taken on, is unbelievable. Like, this is just, he was mortified. He was like, I don't even know what you would do at that point. Like, what do you do at this point? Do you go in and obviously you're examining practice squads on a daily, but you can only replace so many guys before it catches up to you. And I was like, oh no. And that's when I said, you know what? The expectation of the Super Bowl is probably going away. probably going away. Like I was just like, when he said that, he's like, look, you can get injuries to a guy, a couple depth pieces and then one major piece, but when you have like 2 or 3 major pieces on there, he goes like, look, I talked to him last night. He said, you got Aaliyah McNeil now, you got Carlton Davis for a while. He might come back and potentially, like, we didn't know. He's like, they don't really know if he's gonna come back, but we per reports, he can come back for the NFC Championship game. But the issue with that is has a broken jaw, so he's not going to be eating solid food. So he might not come back then either. So it's because if you've ever had a broken jaw, you're not eating solid food. You're relying on your protein and all that stuff. Like, to be a well-established athlete, you need the protein and all of the nutrients, and you got to sip it through a straw. That's the worst part about having a broken jaw. And you just wonder when Carlton Davis can come back. If he's a little bit, if he's a little bit gun shy, like he's not ready to play because his body isn't ready to play. That's what I would worry about with Carlton Davis right there. Like I think Carlton Davis could obviously start, and he could come back, but how is his body reacting to coming back and playing 40, 50 snaps? I don't think real good. So it would be beneficial if the Lions could hang on to this number 1 overall seed, because I think if you hang on to this number 1 overall seed, then you can get some guys back and potentially stave off the elimination. But your defensive line is decimated right now. There's no guy besides DJ Reader that you're like, yeah, we got him and he's been a mainstay on this team. Because if you look at yesterday, Josh Allen had all day yesterday. This is from NFL Pro. Josh Allen completed 23 of his 34 passes for 362 yards and 2 touchdowns in Week 15 against the Detroit Lions, recording an average time to throw of 3 seconds and 3.4 seconds, his longest in a game this since Week 17, 2021. Entering Sunday, Allen had recorded the quickest average time to throw at 2.79. Allen totaled 171 of his passing yards on throws outside the pocket, the most by a quarterback since Russell Wilson in Week 14, 2021. Then he added 69 yards and 2 touchdowns on 10 carries, including a season-high 5 design runs entering Week 15. Allen was averaging a career-low 1.3 design runs per game. So now it gets worse because you don't have no Aaliyah McNeil. And your pass rush is just decimated. Like, we need Hutch back. We need this guy back. Aaliyah McNeil was the guy who was pressuring the quarterback for the most part. Obviously, you have Zadarius Smith, but losing Aaliyah is a huge loss. Huge loss, because you've seen when Aaliyah went out that they started doing some weird stuff in terms of getting outside the pocket, stepping up inside the pocket. That was my worst. That was what I thought was the worst. When Josh Allen was stepping up in the pocket. He don't step up in the pocket. Josh Allen never steps up in the pocket. But in that particular game, he was stepping up in the pocket, and that was where I was like, oh, okay. I've seen it all right now. Like, this is just enough. We go back to the Pro Football Focus grades. Amik Robertson, Carlton Davis, Aaliyah McNeil, they were 2 and 3. David Long had a good game. Pat O'Connor had a good game at 69.8. Quan Alexander had a horrible game. Jonah Williams had a bad game. Jack Campbell had an abnormally bad game. Cleo Dorsey had a bad game. Hopefully he's all good, because that was a rough break right there. And Al-Quadin Muhammad had a bad game, and those are guys that you're going to be relying on moving forward, especially Jonah Williams and Al-Quadin Muhammad with McNeil out. So we're at a bad stage right now, man. It's just, hopefully we could hold on to, if we could just potentially like get to the NFC Championship game, that'd be a successful season. We can hold on to the division, that's be a successful season. So that's my opinion right now, because we're just so decimated with injuries. Barry says it came out he was playing injured. I believe you're talking about Graham Glasgow, and yes, he was playing injured, and that sucks because Glasgow is a stud, and he's been it seems like every game, man, it seems like his play gets worse and worse and worse, and it's not his fault. He's playing hurt. But it's just like, man, how many more injuries can this team have? And these guys on the offensive line, I'm telling you right now, guys like Decker and Glasgow and Ragnow, those guys are playing with some really tough injuries, and they're grinding it out. But man, it's just there's just so much you could take, man. There's just so much you could take before your play really falls off. LM says on the YouTube, he says Goff hasn't had the amount of time to go through his progressions. Like, you're right about the offensive line being off. The offensive line has been, I don't know. I'm gonna go through the when I do my next podcast, probably Thursday or potentially Wednesday or something like that. I'm gonna go through the how many pressures the team has been letting up the offensive line. Because last time I looked, it was Glasgow was giving up the most, Ragnow was giving up the most, and now with Decker back, let me see what it looks like. But I think Decker's obviously playing injured as well. But the thing that's gonna propel Detroit forward, no matter what, is gonna be the offensive line. So it's gonna be very, very interesting to see what happens there. Hopefully the offense could lead us into a good direction. LM also says on YouTube, Goff is going to have to put the team on his back now. That's right. Like, Ben Johnson is a gifted coordinator. I think we all can agree to that. But there's some times where the offense stalls. And if you look at the quarter by quarter analysis, for some reason this team struggles mightily in the first quarter. And that can't happen moving forward. Like, the offense has to take the onus. They have to take over the team. And we have to go back to what we were doing 2 years ago, where the offense had to score 30, 35 points to give us a shot, and they might have to score 42 to win us a game. That's where we're at right now, because, I can't tell Aaron Glenn that he's not doing a good job when he's playing with no one back there. Like, he's got Brian Branch and he's got Kirby Joseph. And if you go back in the preseason or regular season and you look at the projected starters from that game one, and you look at the starters now, there are 3 players on this team that were playing as starters in week 1. Branch, Joseph, and Campbell. And that's the tough part. That's where you've really hit rock. You've really hit a rough spot, is when you got guys like Anzalone and Barnes, they're going down, but then their backups are going down. Like Jalen Reeves-Maybin and Malcolm Rodriguez, like, they're going down. And, Marcus Davenport, Hutchinson, that's 2 starters on the defensive line. Then Aleem McNeil, that's 3 of the 4 starters on the defensive line. And then you go to the linebacker position, I just said it, but you go Anzalone, you go Rodrigo, you go Barnes, you go Jalen Reeves-Maybin. That's 4 linebackers out of 3. The only one that hasn't really got hurt is Jack Campbell. And knock on effing wood. Where is this wood at? Knock on wood that they haven't got hurt. Jack Campbell hasn't got hurt, because, the linebacker core has been decimated. The front 7 has been decimated by injuries. And they're still keeping up, man. They're still doing a damn good job. Like, Aaron Glenn's putting them in the position to do things, but you see what happened yesterday. Like a guy like Ty Johnson, okay? I'll give you this example. I'm going to go through a little film review probably tomorrow. I'll probably post it around 8 o'clock tomorrow. But if you look at this, Ty Johnson destroyed the Detroit Lions. 5 targets, 5 receptions, 114 yards, 0 touchdowns. Look at all those routes. Like, they're not special, but you could see that there is a lot of, isolation routes. There's one quick route. There's one just wheel route. Like, there's one that he's isolated on a linebacker. If you go look at the one on the right-hand side where he goes toward the sideline, that's an isolation route. You look at the one over there that goes, it goes in, it goes out, then it goes back in up the middle of the field. That is what we're talking about with the linebackers. They attacked the linebackers. They made it a point yesterday to attack the linebackers, and it wasn't anybody's fault. It's just they know Joe Brady of the Buffalo Bills knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly who was hurt. He knew exactly what he had to do. And he just said, screw it. Screw it. We're going to go in there. We're going to try to keep it together. And we're going to attack their linebackers. And that's the part that really sucks. It just totally sucks that, now teams are they're going after the linebackers. Like, that's just the part that you're like, okay, I can't take much more of that. That's just not the way I expected this to go. And then, I'll come about the film review, but you think about it like this: we are going to go against guys like, we're going to get in the playoffs. We go to clinch a spot in the playoffs, but if you win the division, you could be potentially playing a guy like, maybe in the second round or, maybe the NFC Championship game, Saquon Barkley or Kyren Williams. And you seen what Ty Johnson, that's a person the Detroit Lions drafted a long time ago, and he destroyed the Lions. You're afraid of what they could do. Barkley and Kyren Williams, those are two great backs. Even a Bucky Irving or a Rachaad White, those are guys that could do that. And that's where that's where the loss of Anzalone was huge. Like, it really showed up there, because you think about it like this: like, those linebackers, they're put on an island with a running back, and that's never a good situation. We know that with Jahmyr Gibbs. When Jahmyr Gibbs is on a linebacker, that's an easy touchdown, But when they're playing man coverage, it's isolation. They're they're doing a motion. This guy's going this way. This guy's going this way. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Turner is on Ty Johnson? James Cook? Like, what are we doing, guys? Like, it just sucks, man. It really does suck that this offense this defense has been so decimated by injuries. And credit to Aaron Glenn, because if Aaron Glenn wasn't as good as he's been, he's been one of the best coordinators that you could even imagine. With the amount of injuries that he's had to deal with, he's had to rotate, he's had to reevaluate everything he's had to do over and over and over again. And there's only so much you could do. Like, Rex Ryan's put it great. It's the, hey, you come over here and go do the blitz. Hey, you come over here and go in the zone coverage. Like, he's like, you can only do that so much before you start to see a little drop off. And luckily for Aaron Glenn, like, they haven't had a huge drop off, but a lot of that is the offense. And the offense has to take onus now, because the offense is they're going to have to win time of possession, because they have to keep the ball away from the other offense. And they're going to have to start this week against Chicago. And they're going to do it against the San Francisco 49ers, just to get in the mode of what they have to do against the Minnesota Vikings, because that game is going to come down to the division. Hopefully it doesn't, but we all know that's going to come back. That's going to come down to the division. So we'll see what happens. Let's get to some comments right here. Let's see. Ed O'Neill says, last year when the offense had to carry us, they disappeared in 3 drives and we blew a 17-point lead in the NFC Championship game. I've seen this story already. This is such a depressing comment. I can't even lie. It's true though. Like, if you expect your offense to be perfect, what are we doing? Like, can the offense truly be perfect? No, but it is what it is. Barry, it's like back to the 2021 defense. Oh boy. I said the same thing, but then I instantly depressed myself, and I'm depressed again here. It sucks, because this team, when they're healthy, is an excellent team. Very excellent team. Ed O'Neill, the Bears will just copycat the same plan. And you know what? They got a guy that can run it too. And that's the toughest part. DeAndre Swift. We all know DeAndre Swift is talented. Now he's a lunatic sometimes when he takes the wrong hole or whatever, but he is good in the pass game. We've seen that before, and that's the guy we're going to go against next week. So, and he can make you pay. Swift can make you pay for sure. That's a good point. Second round, most likely we'll play Green Bay or Minnesota. Yeah, if we win the division, if we get the number 1 seed, like you said in the next comment, you play Green Bay or Minnesota. And what scares you the most about Minnesota? It stands out right away. Minnesota. What scares me about Minnesota is Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson. He's a possession guy. He's not a vertical threat kind of guy, but he's still someone that could beat you, right? But Addison and Jefferson, they're incredible. They are truly incredible. Aaron Jones stabilizes that backfield way better than last year when they had Cam Akers. Cam Akers is a bum anyways, but Aaron Jones, he was one of the better backs last year in football. I don't know why Green Bay got rid of him. Josh Jacobs is having a good year, so that's all right. And with Green Bay, they have so much speed on the wide receiver position. Like, they are very, very tough to corral. Luckily, we beat them, and we beat them a couple times, but they have some players that can really beat you too. And we played them last game, the Packers, without Edgerrin Cooper. That's a linchpin of their defense, in my opinion. He's a rookie from Texas A&M, and he's been playing out of his mind. He's one of the best linebackers in football, in my opinion. He was out the last couple games. He was out the Detroit game, obviously, and it just whenever he's in that lineup, Packers seem like a different team. Ed says Lions need Alex here for the playoffs. Yes, they do. This upcoming division games will tell us a lot. Yeah, well, you got one against Chicago on the road. I think the San Francisco game could test you as well, because I think Isaac Guerendo, I think he could test you. He could sneak out there. And don't you dare think that San Francisco is not going to look at what the Buffalo Bills did and not put Deebo Samuel in that spot. That's the thing that worries me. Like, who is going to guard Deebo Samuel if he's put in the backfield on a pass play? Yeah, it's just not good. We have to depend on the offense to be perfect now. They can't even take one drive off, or we are in trouble. The problem, Ed, the problem is they've been taking quarters off. The first quarter, they're a negative point differential. The fourth quarter, which I don't take much about the fourth quarter, because a lot of these games we've destroyed teams and they don't need to score in the fourth quarter, but we're a negative differential in there. Most of our points come in the second and third quarters. That is the reality. And yeah, they can't take a drive. They have to be perfect now, and they cannot take off one drive or we are in trouble. That's exactly right. And Ed, you mentioned on the first comment of the day, you mentioned the NFC Championship game. See, a lot of people, they go back to the whole Josh Reynolds dropped the pass. We don't talk about, obviously Josh Reynolds dropped the pass, but we don't talk about the Jahmyr Gibbs fumble. Like, they went stagnant in the third quarter, and they fell apart. Ed hit it on the nail. Like, we asked that offense to be perfect, and when we got to a crucial time in the season and they needed a score, they didn't. And that's the problem. You can't always rely on the offense, but we have to rely on the offense now because the defense is so decimated with injuries. It's just, oh my God. LM says, yeah, we need Thor back, and I agree. We need Thor back in the strongest ways. You know, the one thing about Alex Anzalone that I've seen, especially last week, I saw this in conjunction. You know, Jordan Love, he there was a couple plays I thought he could have made with his legs. He didn't. He tried to check it down or do something stupid. Jordan Love's a head case. When he had 3 open runs last week that could have been touchdowns, and he decided to check it down to Tucker Kraft, or I forget the other guy that they had. Forget who the other guy was, but he was checking him down. He had a wide open lane where Anzalone would have been, or Jack Campbell, but Jack Campbell was covering someone, and he just said, "I'm going to check it down real quick." The only way that game isn't for the division is if the Lions win the next 2 and Minnesota drops one of the 3 games. We can clinch them. Yeah. Yep. Look, Minnesota's schedule is let me pull up their schedule real quick. We know they play the Bears tonight. So they play the Seahawks, which I don't know if you're following the news, but Smith is hurt now. So thanks to the Seahawks. Don't matter there. They play the Packers the week after, and then they play the Lions. So they play the Bears tonight, Seahawks next week, and then the Packers. And hopefully the Packers have something to play for in terms of seeding, and I'm sure they will, especially the 5th seed or whatever the case may be. I'm sure they want to beat the Vikings. Ed says only way you read this. Lions will need luck of a draw to make Super Bowl. In my opinion, gotta hope Tampa Bay can upset Philly. Even a team like Tampa Bay really scares the daylights out of me. I'm gonna be totally honest with you. A team like Tampa Bay, they present matchup problems. And last year it was a tough game, but we were healthy. But a guy like Rashad White and their new toy that they have, Bucky Irving, or the hell his name is, the dude's a man possessed, and they have, especially if there's no linebackers back by that time, they have pieces that can beat you, and their defensive line is their front seven's pretty good. Glacier Kansas been playing outstanding, but they're a good team. They've been turning on. The only two teams they beat the two best teams, I believe, Kansas City and Detroit, and the rest something like that. I know they beat Detroit and they beat someone else, but I can't remember that one. But it's escaping me. But it is what it is. Let's get to some more things. Yeah. It says they did the same thing last year. They would take off quarters last year. Last year was the third quarter. I think we all remember that third quarter. We called it the third quarter because the Lions would routinely. Third quarter would be like the death knell. Like you're like, dude, are you serious right now? Like that's exactly what I'd say every third quarter, and it was just like they're giving a lead back. They're not scoring as many points as they were, and then it's this and this. Just spare me. All right. Euro says our season over, Detroit Lions. Let's move on to next year. Now, Euro, you could be right. You could also be wrong. I hope you're wrong. I hope I'm wrong about the Super Bowl thing. I mean, I no longer have a hope for a Super Bowl, but I don't think the season's over by any stretch of imagination. I think that I still have hope that they could do some things, but it's gonna be all on the offense. Like Ed said before, we've seen we're gonna have to need the same thing that we got last year, but better and without Dave Montgomery. So that's gonna be interesting. Barry says, I think Love is a little injured too. Yeah, he's. I think he still has a growing injury. So it is what it is. That's how it has been going. All right, the last thing I wanted to show people. So obviously, we came into the game yesterday. And one of the things I told you about in the last podcast was the rushing in the red zone, the defensive statistic, and Detroit was 22nd, and the Buffalo Bills were second in the league. And boy, did that come to fruition in a hurry. Josh Allen had those 2 rushing touchdowns. Just insane. And I was just amazed by the way they couldn't defend the rush in the red zone. And that statistic came to come to roost for this Detroit Lions team. And that sucked because I told you in the last podcast I could pull up the clip, but I'm not going to do that. It's going to take me forever to do that, and I don't want to bore people. But we talked about it before. Like they struggle in the red zone, and this Buffalo team can present matchup problems, and that's what I would worry about with the Eagles. I think they could do the same thing that the Buffalo Bills did yesterday in the red zone. Would you rather play Tampa Bay or Philly in the Tampa game? Philly's defense is no joke. Oh yeah, Ed about the Buccaneers says they blew out the Eagles. So they blew out the 2 best. I mean, they beat the 2 best NFC teams, so they're a pretty good team. But who would I rather play out of the Tampa Bay or Philly in the NFC Championship game? Tampa Bay. Philly, I want no part of. Saquon Barkley, I want no part of. I want no part of that defense. That defense is scary as hell, especially when you think about like this. Jordan Davis and especially Jalen Carter. Zach Bond has been playing out of his mind this year. Free agent pickup from New Orleans. And Barkley's playing like an MVP candidate. I want no part of them at all. They have weapons everywhere. On offense, they could totally exploit our defense with the losses that we've had and the lack of pass rush. Like their offensive line is just as good as Detroit's. Their defensive line is better than Detroit's right now as it stands. And I want no part of Philly. Absolutely no part of Philly. I need to see what they do to make up my mind, in my opinion. It'll take luck and the offense to come through. I totally agree with you there. Let me see what happens in the next couple weeks, and then I'll make my decision if I think the season's over or whatnot. But I at this point, like, am I expecting a Super Bowl appearance? No. But we'll see there. Danny Payne says, you are all crazy if you think the Lions are done. Well, Danny, I wish I shared your sentiment. Look, eventually the injuries are just going to take hold of the team. Eventually. You can't outrun injuries in the crucial parts of the team. And you've lost so much in that front seven. I don't care who you are. The amount of people that you have lost in the front seven is unbelievable. Unbelievable. Like, I've never seen anything like it. We went through it before. They lost their starter. They lost their backups on the right and left linebacker. They lost their starting two defensive ends. They lost their starting defensive tackle, the guy who could rush the passer. They lost their two best pass rushers this season, for the season, in Ali McNeil and Hutchinson. Like, people are objected to have an opinion on whether Detroit's going to be a good team or not going forward. You know, it's not a rocket science. Like, I wish I could say with certainty that the Detroit Lions are going to be fine. But with certainty, I could say this. They're going to have issues moving forward. And like Ed has said up here, I'll put his comment up because he was totally right here. Ed says this right here. He says, I need to see what they do before I make a mind, but it will take luck and the offense to come through. Whenever you win a championship, it comes down to luck, in my opinion. Because you're going through the battle of attrition. You see it a lot in hockey. You know, usually the healthiest team wins. Even in football, it's like that, where the healthiest team does win. But this is a lot of injuries, man, to one side of the ball. It's just, you could, like Adam Schefter said in the clip before, he said, you know, look, you could really have a starting defense out of the injured list. And it's true. It's so true. I mean, I'm gonna have to go through how many people on the 53-man roster. I mean, we forget about Johnny Kaminsky. He could be on the roster, but he tore his ACL in training camp. It just goes to show you, man. Like, they have had so many injuries in one part of the team that it's like, how much can he take, and how good of a Brad Holmes is Brad Holmes trying to replace talent with the talent that they've lost? There's no correlation to the talent that they've lost, but they've had guys come in and do something, and it's just like, man, this is really rough. Danny Payne says Philly. He says he would rather play Philly in the championship game. I would be interested to see why you would want to play Philly, but it is what it is. Euro Jack says injuries cost Lions season over to me too many. Yeah, you're right. You know, you could be right. Ed says our interior offensive line has been concerning too. Brad will have to draft. Yeah, I think I worry about two things in particular. I worry about Frank Ragnow hanging it up. Zeitler is an older guy. Graham is an older guy. So we got to replace some of these offensive linemen. I think I have potential. I think I see a little bit potential in Christian Mahogany. I think I see potential in Coyote Ashika. But Hank Fraley's done a damn good job, and they're gonna have to draft some offensive linemen coming up here. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, this interior offensive line has been pretty bad, and it's not their fault. They're playing with injuries, but it is just what it is. Eddie also says if the Lions come out and dominate Chicago and San Francisco, it could be totally different. But I want to see more from the offense. I want to see what AG does with when we need to get 1 or 2 stops a game at least. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. These next 2 games are going to be all hands on deck on the defensive side. And if you're an offense, you have to go. And you should totally dominate the Chicago Bears, and you should totally dominate the San Francisco 49ers with your offense that you have, weather permitting, on both the fronts, because those are going to be outdoor games. But just sucks, man. This what Ed says right here is exactly what it's going to come down to. We got to see what the offense is going to look like without Montgomery, because I think that's going to be a big part of this game, a big part of the season moving forward without Montgomery. And we got to see if AG gets at least 1 or 2 stops a game, and we're going to have to win with offense. There's no way we're winning with defense. None. Ed says we are going to be in a critical moment in a playoff game, and either the offense or defense will have to come back for us. Will have to come through for us. Can you trust either side to come through for us currently? This is a good question. I would say offense easily, because I can't trust the defense. I mean, first of all, defense needs to get more takeaways. That's number 1. Number 2, I have more faith in the offense because I think there's more talent on the offense right now. And as beaten and battered and bruised as the offensive line is, and missing Montgomery, I still think that they have the talent that could supersede them getting a touchdown. I can't expect the defense to get a stop because they're so injured. It's unbelievable. Euro says Aaron Glenn will not get no stop. Too many injuries, no talent, bunch of practice squad bums. You know what? There's been some practice squad guys that really showed out, like Turner, like Quadeen Muhammad. There's been some guys that have really showed out for the Lions, and they're going to get more chances. Like Dan Campbell said this is going to open up a lot of opportunities for other players on this team. That's what it's going to do. It's going to open up a lot of opportunity for players on this team. So we're going to see exactly what this Detroit Lions team is going to be like. And the next couple games will really tell us a lot. I mean, I think San Francisco can really test this defense. I think Chicago could test this defense, and we're going to see exactly what this team is all about moving forward. But today, it's a little bit of commiserating, and you hear guys like even guys like Valenti, who I think he has a pretty good pulse on the team, in my opinion, because you picked him to go to the Super Bowl. And even he's like, man, this is so many injuries. I've never seen anything like this. That's a guy that, he's seen some injuries with the Giants. But, you got Booger McFarland saying this is so many injuries. I think Booger counted 29. It's just too much right now, man. It's just too much. So we'll see what happens moving forward with this Detroit Lions team. But at this point in time, they need some help in a lot of spots. So you look at the depth chart right now. They're going to be good. They need some help with some of these. They're going to sign some guys off practice squads, obviously. Patrick Peterson's also available. Xavier Howard's also available, but they're gonna need to sign some guys moving forward. So it's gonna be interesting what we see from this Detroit Lions team moving forward. And obviously, when you talk about the Detroit Lions, you talk about the offense, how good the offense has been doing, and that's who's gonna have to take charge of this team. Defense, they're not good. They're not good enough no more. There's so many injuries on the defense side of the ball. they can't possibly pull any more from this season. This has been too much, man. Let's get to the last comment. Barry says, if he got put on a 21-day window, he could play as soon as this Sunday. How could he help us? Well, before, so here's how it would go. I think they said they were going to move Branch around a couple spots. Maybe he goes back to nickel corner to help out Meek Robertson on the outside. If he can go play safety, he could be up in the box safety. He could be a linebacker as well on certain downs, but he's also had experience at cornerback, so you could use him in a lot of ways. I think Ennis Rakestraw come back. That's a big one. I know people have seen Emmanuel Mosley. They've seen him on the inactive list a couple of times. He should be able to play. It's going to be interesting to see what they do, because obviously losing Carlton Davis is a big loss. He was the Pro Football Focus top cornerback in the NFL. And no one's been better than him. No one's been better than him in terms. I think there was, if I go back to it right here, where was it at? Oh, right here. If I go back to it right here, he's allowed a passer rating 56.3 over the stretch, better than all but 11 cornerbacks. And you look at his Pro Football Focus grade, 83.1. That was the best overall grade, and his coverage grade was also number 1. So that's what you're replacing. You're hoping that you can get the most out of Fatu Melifonwu. But at this point in time, big loss for the Lions at the Carlton Davis position. Ed brings up my biggest concern is Aleem, to be honest. Gonna miss watching him play. We will truly know what this team is made of now. Dan says they have to thrive in adversity, so we will see. Yeah, I'm the most worried about that too, because if I go back to it, I know Terrell Williams could get these guys going. I know he can, but Lee McNeil, he's a huge piece of this team. He's been a huge part to this team, and I just look at Lee McNeil, and a guy like that, I thought he was the final linchpin of this defensive line, and now that he's out, all hell could break loose, if we're going to be totally honest with each other. But this is how it sets up right now. So obviously they lost the Buffalo game. So if you look at that, they're 15-2. They win the next 3. They got a 100% chance at the division, 100% chance at the number 1 overall seed. If they lose against Chicago, they got a 76% chance to win the division. I mean, to win the number 1 seed, and 100% chance to win the division. They really don't drop until you really don't see a drop off. Obviously, they lost to Buffalo. So if they lose to Buffalo and they lose to Minnesota, they got a 63% chance of winning the division. If they lose, some of the, Buffalo really wasn't a consequential game in terms of the number 1 overall seed, but you can see the percentages go down with each loss, and especially against NFC teams. So thank God Buffalo Bills play in the NFC, but you can see right here, like, this is just the way it goes, and sucks bad. But yeah. Okay, now you look. So what Barry says was they opened up the 21-day window for Fatu Melifonwu. Could be back as soon as Sunday. Could need more time. Need to see how he looks in practice. And then his Rakestraw is not quite ready. So whatever the case may be, we're going to be going without guys. So we need to kind of put it together and move on, and we'll see what happens there. But all right. This has been a good podcast. I'll see you guys in the next podcast. We talk more Detroit Lions football here on the Detroit Lions News podcast. I will podcast this. And at any point, if you missed any point of this episode, any point, and you want to go back and you want to go listen to it, you could go and scan this QR code, and you could go to Apple and iTunes. And if you like the podcast, I would appreciate it if you go to Apple or Spotify and rate the podcast. I'd really appreciate that. That helps out a lot. But thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you in the next podcast. Hopefully we got more information about what could potentially be going on. Obviously, we know the 3 players that we lost today, but moving forward, what is going to happen with the Detroit Lions team is uncertain. And they got a big game coming up here against Chicago. Big game coming up against San Francisco. And obviously, a Minnesota game looms large. So I will see you guys in the next podcast. And Ed asked, when is the next show? I want to make sure I am here. Ed, I'll probably Wednesday. Maybe Thursday. I'll let you know. I'll let people know on Twitter and the YouTube. If you're subscribed, I'll put a post out there, and the Facebook page, Detroit Lions News podcast on Facebook. So if you're not, you could still go on the Spotify. But yeah, I'll be live Thursday or Wednesday. So there's no doubt about that. So I'll see you guys in the next podcast. We talk more Detroit Lions football here on the Detroit Lions News podcast. Thank you guys for interacting. It's awesome. It was awesome to have that many interactions. And we'll see you guys in the next podcast. We talk more Detroit Lions football. And go Bears. I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it because I don't like the Bears, but it'd be really nice if the Bears could beat the Vikings. That would be awesome. So go Caleb. Even though you paint your fingernails, we'll be all right. See you guys in the next podcast.